ಸರ್ವೇಭ್ಯೋ ನಮಃ. ಇಂದು ಗೋಖಲೆ ಸಾರ್ವಜನಿಕ ವಿಚಾರ ಸಂಸ್ಥೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಶ್ರೀಯುತ ಗೋಪಾಲಕೃಷ್ಣ ಗೋಖಲೆ ಯಾರ ಹೆಸರಿನಲ್ಲಿ ನಮ್ಮ ಸಂಸ್ಥೆ ಸ್ಥಾಪಿತವಾಗಿದೆಯೋ ಡಿ ವಿ ಗುಂಡಪ್ಪನವರಿಂದ ಅವರ ಹೆಸರಿನಲ್ಲಿ ಒಂದು ಆ್ಯನ್ಯುವಲ್ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮ ನಡೀತಾ ಇದೆ. ಇದನ್ನು ನಡೆಸ್ಕೊಡೋದಕ್ಕೆ ದೂರದ ಚೆನ್ನೈ ನಗರದಿಂದ ಪ್ರೊಫೆಸರ್ ಡಿ ಶ್ರೀನಿವಾಸ್ ಅವರು ದಯಮಾಡಿಸಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಮೊದಲಿಗೆ ಎಲ್ಲ ಶ್ರೋತೃಗಳ ಪರವಾಗಿ, ಸಂಸ್ಥೆಯ ಪರವಾಗಿ ಅವರಿಗೆ ಹೃತ್ಪೂರ್ವಕ ಸ್ವಾಗತವನ್ನು ಕೋರ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೇನೆ. ಪ್ರೊಫೆಸರ್ ಡಿ ಶ್ರೀನಿವಾಸ್ ಅವರು ಬೆಂಗಳೂರಿನಲ್ಲಿ ಅಥವಾ ದೇಶದೆಲ್ಲೆಡೆ ಯಾರು ಭಾರತೀಯತೆಯನ್ನು ಕುರಿತು ಆಲೋಚನೆ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೋ ಮತ್ತು ಆ ದಿಕ್ಕಿನಲ್ಲಿ ಕಾರ್ಯಪ್ರವೃತ್ತರಾಗಿದ್ದಾರೋ ಅವರಿಗೆಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ಚಿರಪರಿಚಿತರಾದವರು. ಅವರು ಬೆಂಗಳೂರಿನವರೇ ಅನ್ನೋದು ನಮಗೆ ಒಂದು ಹೆಮ್ಮೆಯ ಸಂಗತಿ. ಈಗ ಅವರು ಸೆಂಟರ್ ಫಾರ್ ಪಾಲಿಸಿ ಸ್ಟಡೀಸ್ ಎಂಬ ಚೆನ್ನೈ ನಗರದಲ್ಲಿ ಯಾವ ಒಂದು ಸಂಸ್ಥೆ ಇದೆ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಕಾರ್ಯಪ್ರವೃತ್ತರಾಗಿ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. ಅವರು ಮೂಲತಃ ಭೌತಶಾಸ್ತ್ರವನ್ನು ಅಧ್ಯಯನ ಮಾಡಿದವರು, ಅಧ್ಯಾಪನವನ್ನು ಮಾಡಿದವರು. ಭಾರತೀಯ ವಿಜ್ಞಾನ ಪರಂಪರೆಯ ಅನೇಕ ಆಯಾಮಗಳಲ್ಲಿ, ಶಾಖೆಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಅವರಿಗೆ ಆಸಕ್ತಿ, ಪರಿಶ್ರಮ ಇದೆ. ಮತ್ತು ನಮ್ಮ ದೇಶವನ್ನು ಕುರಿತಂತೆ ಇಲ್ಲಿಯ ಮತಾಚರಣೆಗಳು, ಧರ್ಮ, ಸಂಸ್ಕೃತಿ, ಆರ್ಥಿಕತೆ, ರಾಜ್ಯಶಾಸ್ತ್ರ ಮುಂತಾದ ಅನ್ಯಾನ್ಯ ವಿಭಾಗಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಅವರಿಗೆ ತಳಮುಟ್ಟಿದ ತಿಳುವಳಿಕೆ ಕೂಡ ಇದೆ. ಅವರು ನಾನು ಆಗಲೇ ಹೇಳಿದ ಹಾಗೆ ಭೌತಶಾಸ್ತ್ರವನ್ನು ವ್ಯಾಸಂಗ ಮಾಡಿದವರು. BSc MSc ಎರಡೂ ಬೆಂಗಳೂರು ವಿಶ್ವವಿದ್ಯಾಲಯದಲ್ಲಿ ಅವರು ಪಡ್ಕೊಂಡ್ರು. ತದನಂತರ PhD ಪದವಿಗಾಗಿ ಅವರು ಸೈದ್ಧಾಂತಿಕ ಭೌತಶಾಸ್ತ್ರ ಅಂದರೆ ಥಿಯರಿಟಿಕಲ್ ಫಿಸಿಕ್ಸ್ ಆ ಒಂದು ವಿದ್ಯಾಶಾಖೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಪಡ್ಕೊಂಡ್ರು ಅಮೇರಿಕದ ಯೂನಿವರ್ಸಿಟಿ ಆಫ್ ರಾಚೆಸ್ಟರ್ನಲ್ಲಿ. ಆ ಒಂದು ಭೌತಶಾಸ್ತ್ರವನ್ನೇ ಅವರು ಮಡ್ರಾಸ್ ವಿಶ್ವವಿದ್ಯಾನಿಲಯದಲ್ಲಿ ಅನೇಕ ದಶಕಗಳ ಕಾಲ ಬೋಧನೆ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರು. ಲೆಕ್ಚರರ್ ಆಗಿ, ರೀಡರ್ ಆಗಿ, ಪ್ರೊಫೆಸರ್ ಆಗಿ ಅವರಲ್ಲಿ ಸೇವೆಯನ್ನು ಸಲ್ಲಿಸಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಮತ್ತು ಮುಖ್ಯವಾಗಿ 1996ರಿಂದ ಚೆನ್ನೈನ ನಾನು ಯಾವ ಒಂದು ಸಂಸ್ಥೆ ಹೇಳಿದೆ ಸಮಾಜ ನೀತಿ ಸಮೀಕ್ಷಣ ಕೇಂದ್ರ ಸೆಂಟರ್ ಫಾರ್ ಪಾಲಿಸಿ ಸ್ಟಡೀಸ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಸೀನಿಯರ್ ಫೆಲೋ ಆಗಿ ಕೆಲಸವನ್ನು ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. ಅನೇಕ ಸಂಘ ಸಂಸ್ಥೆಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಅವರು ಉನ್ನತ ಸ್ಥಾನಗಳನ್ನು ಅಲಂಕರಿಸಿದ್ದಾರೆ. INSA ಇಂಡಿಯನ್ ನ್ಯಾಷನಲ್ ಸೈನ್ಸ್ ಅಕಾಡೆಮಿ, ಸೆಂಟ್ರಲ್ ಸಂಸ್ಕೃತ್ ಬೋರ್ಡ್, ಇಂಡಿಯನ್ ಇನ್ಸ್ಟಿಟ್ಯೂಟ್ ಆಫ್ ಅಡ್ವಾನ್ಸ್ ಸ್ಟಡಿ ಶಿಮ್ಲಾ ಮುಂತಾದ ಸಂಸ್ಥೆಗಳ ಜೊತೆ ಅವರ ಸಹಭಾಗಿತ್ವ ಇದೆ. ಮತ್ತು ಬಹಳ ಪ್ರಮುಖವಾದ ಕೃತಿಗಳನ್ನು ಅವರು ಸಹಕರ್ತೃಕವಾಗಿಯೂ ಸ್ವತಂತ್ರವಾಗಿಯೂ ರಚಿಸಿದ್ದಾರೆ, ಸಂಪಾದನೆಯನ್ನು ಮಾಡಿಕೊಟ್ಟಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಅನ್ನಂ ಬಹುಕುರ್ವೀತ ಎಂಬ ಬಹಳ ವಿನೂತನವಾದ ಒಂದು ಕೃತಿ ಅವರು JK ಬಜಾಜ್ ಎಂಬ ವಿದ್ವಾಂಸರ ಜೊತೆಗೂಡಿ ಬರೆದಂತಹ ಕೃತಿ. ಅದು ನಮ್ಮ ದೇಶದಲ್ಲಿರುವಂತಹ ಆಹಾರದ ಸಂಸ್ಕೃತಿಯನ್ನು ಕುರಿತಾದದ್ದು. ಆಹಾರವನ್ನು ನಮ್ಮಲ್ಲಿ ಹೇಗೆ ಪರಿಭಾವಿಸ್ತಿದ್ರು, ಅದನ್ನು ಹೇಗೆ ಹೆಚ್ಚು ಹೆಚ್ಚು ಉತ್ಪಾದನೆಯನ್ನು ಮಾಡಿ ಹೆಚ್ಚು ಹೆಚ್ಚು ವಿತರಣೆ, ಸಂವಿಭಾಗವನ್ನು ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ರು ಎಂಬ ಒಂದು ಆಶಯವನ್ನು ಬಹಳ ಚೆನ್ನಾಗಿ ತೋರ್ಪಡಿಸುವ ಕೃತಿ. ಟೈಮ್ಲೆಸ್ ಇಂಡಿಯಾ, ರಿಸರ್ಜೆಂಟ್ ಇಂಡಿಯಾ ಎಂಬ ಮತ್ತೊಂದು ಕೃತಿ. ರಿಲಿಜಿಯಸ್ ಡೆಮೋಗ್ರಫಿ ಆಫ್ ಇಂಡಿಯಾ ಇದು ಅಷ್ಟೇ ಬಹಳ ಪ್ರಮುಖವಾದ ಕೃತಿ. ಈ ಎಲ್ಲ ಗ್ರಂಥಗಳು ಕೂಡ ಪ್ರೊಫೆಸರ್ ಶ್ರೀನಿವಾಸ್ ಅವರು ಯಾವ್ಯಾವ ಕೃತಿಗಳನ್ನು ಹೊರತಂದಿದ್ದಾರೆ ಆಯಾ ವಿದ್ಯಾಕ್ಷೇತ್ರಗಳಲ್ಲಿ, ಶಾಖೆಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಆಕರ ಗ್ರಂಥಗಳಾಗಿವೆ ಮತ್ತು ಈ ಹೊತ್ತಿಗೆ ಕೂಡ ಆಯಾ ಒಂದು ಕ್ಷೇತ್ರಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಸೀಮಾರೇಖೆಗಳೇ ಎನಿಸಿವೆ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ ಅತ್ಯುಕ್ತಿ ಆಗಲಾರದು. ಮತ್ತು ಅವರಿಗೆ ಭಾರತೀಯ ಗಣಿತಶಾಸ್ತ್ರ, ಜ್ಯೋತಿಷ, ತಂತ್ರಜ್ಞಾನ ಮುಂತಾದ ವಿಷಯಗಳಲ್ಲೂ ಬಹಳ ಆಸಕ್ತಿ ಇದೆ. ಅದರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಬಹಳ ಅಧಿಕೃತವಾಗಿ ಅವರು ಮಾತನಾಡಬಲ್ಲರು. ಅನೇಕ ವೇದಿಕೆಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಇದನ್ನು ಕುರಿತು ಉದ್ಬೋಧಕ ಉಪನ್ಯಾಸಗಳನ್ನು ಕೂಡ ಅವರು ನೀಡಿದ್ದಾರೆ. MS ಶ್ರೀರಾಮ್ ಮತ್ತು ಪ್ರೊಫೆಸರ್ K ರಾಮಸುಬ್ರಹ್ಮಣ್ಯಂ ಇವರ ಜೊತೆಗೂಡಿ ಅವರು ಅನೇಕ ಕೃತಿಗಳನ್ನು ಗಣಿತಶಾಸ್ತ್ರಕ್ಕೆ ಸಂಬಂಧಿಸಿದಂತೆ ಹೊರತಂದಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಮತ್ತು ಈ ಹೊತ್ತಿನ ವಿಷಯ ಏನಿದೆ ಶ್ರೀಯುತ ಧರ್ಮಪಾಲ್ ಅವರ ಜೀವನ ಮತ್ತು ಸಾಧನೆ ಅಂತ, ಇದನ್ನು ಕುರಿತು ಕೂಡ ಪ್ರೊಫೆಸರ್ ಶ್ರೀನಿವಾಸ್ ಅವರು ಮಾತನಾಡುವುದಕ್ಕೆ ಅವರು ಅಧಿಕೃತರೇ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಬೇಕು. ಯಾಕೆ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ ಅವರು ಯಾವ ಸಂಸ್ಥೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೋ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಧರ್ಮಪಾಲ್ ಕ್ಲಾಸಿಕ್ಸ್ ಸೀರೀಸ್ ಎಂಬ ಹೆಸರಿನಲ್ಲಿ 5 ಸಂಪುಟಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಧರ್ಮಪಾಲ್ ಅವರ ಪ್ರಮುಖ ರಚನೆಗಳನ್ನು ಹೊರತಂದಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಮತ್ತು ಅದಕ್ಕಿಂತ ಹೆಚ್ಚಾಗಿ ಸುಮಾರು 15,000ಗಳಿಗೂ ಹೆಚ್ಚು ಪುಟಗಳಷ್ಟಿರುವಂತಹ ಧರ್ಮಪಾಲ್ ಆರ್ಕೈವ್ಸ್ ಆ ಸಂಸ್ಥೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಪರಿರಕ್ಷಿತವಾಗಿದೆ. ಹಾಗಾಗಿ ಅವರಿಗೆ ಮೂಲ ಆಕಾರಗಳ ಒಂದು ಸ್ಪಷ್ಟವಾದ ತಿಳುವಳಿಕೆ ಇರೋದರಿಂದ ಅವರು ಆ ಕುರಿತು ಮಾತನಾಡುವುದಕ್ಕೆ ಬಹಳ ಸಮರ್ಥರು ಅಂತ ನಾವೆಲ್ಲರೂ ಭಾವಿಸಬಹುದು. ನಮಗೆಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ನಮ್ಮ ಅಸ್ಮಿತೆಯನ್ನು ಜಾಗರಣೆ ಮಾಡುವುದರಲ್ಲಿ
and presented glimpses and facets of our civilization, our society prior to the time when the subjugation occurred, or at least when the time when our spirit was still alive. And he has meditated on the way in which we can come out of this state of subjugation and intellectual slavery. So, towards this, he made himself a scholar of studying the various aspects of India just prior to the British conquest of India in 18th century. And he has rigorously documented much of what he found and published quite a bit of it in the form of books. And these books do present a, I think I have to do it this way. Let me see. What is it's much better here. Is it all right if I? Yeah, sure. Okay. So these books do present a picture of Indian society which is contrary to what we generally know from our books and literature and media, that this was indeed a highly sophisticated and advanced society in terms of its political ideas and arrangements, and in its sciences, technologies, education systems, etc. So his works in that sense are of continued importance even today also, because this understanding has not yet pervaded into our public consciousness, into our scholarly discourses. Some of the important works of Dharmapalji have listed: Panchayat Raj, 1962, Civil Disobedience, 1971, Indian Science and Technology in the 18th century, 71, The Beautiful Tree, 82, some aspects of earlier Indian society, which is written, published in 87. A similar publication originated in Bengaluru when in 1987, October, Dharmapalji gave a set of 3 lectures in Rashtrothana Parishad in Chamarajpet. They were published later on by Sri Ramaswamiji in Kannada under the title Bharata Jagrati in 1989. I'm sure that book would still be available, and it will give you a very good idea of his thought. One of the final seminal books Dharmapalji wrote was Bharatiya Chittamanas and Kala, 1993. So as Shashi Kiranji said, the first 4 and the last book have been republished as a part of Dharmapal Classic Series. An authentic version of his works are now available. So a quick summary of his life to start with. He was born in Kandla, Uttar Pradesh, and his family shifted to Lahore. In 1940, while he was studying BSc Physics, he abandoned studies, joined the freedom movement. That was the time of what was called the individual satyagraha. He had the good fortune of being present in Bombay in the Dadar Maidan when Mahatma Gandhi delivered the great Quit India speech on August 9, 1942. And he went underground, and he was briefly arrested in 1943 also. During 44 to 46, he worked with Gandhiji's associate Miraben. Then after independence, there was the work on rehabilitation of refugees who came from Pakistan. Then he was away, visited England and Israel to see the villages, because the idea was village development at that time. 1950 to 54, they tried to set up an ideal village, Bapugram, near Rishikesh, with Miraben. So he found all those experiments were very interesting from an individual point of view, but they really didn't yield the kind of results at the social level. And so he wanted to do much more. And in 58, they started the Association of Voluntary Agencies for Rural Development with Jayaprakash Narayan ji as the president, and Dharmapal was the secretary. So they studied the working of the panchayats all over India, and in this process, first Dharmapalji brought out his compilation, his first book, which is actually a summary of the debates in the Constituent Assembly. Anyway, another interesting facet was, on November 21st, 1962, Shri Dharmapal, along with N.N. Datta and Roop Narayan, they wrote an open letter, which they posted to all the MPs, condemning Pandit Jawaharlal Nehruji's weak response to Chinese invasion of India. As a consequence, he was immediately, and his colleagues were put in jail, and Lal Bahadur Shastri and various people had to intervene. Finally, they were released after 2 months. 63 to 65, he studied, not active for the rest of his life. He's still around. But he used this opportunity. By then, he had come to this understanding that much more detailed study of Indian records have to be seen to see the actual ground situation in India in 18th and 19th century. So he became a regular daily visitor to the British Museum, British Library, and he had his own typewriter. And so whole day he would sit, and those days people used to only hand copy all the records, and in the night he would come back and make about 5-6 copies, and then circulate it to some of the friends in India, what were the interesting things he were finding. So he used to read record after record, about a dozen hours he used to spend in library every day. So his first major books came in 71-72 based upon his archival work. The book on science and technology and book on civil disobedience were published in 71-72. His survey of the Madras Panchayat system was also published then. Then briefly he was a fellow of the A.N. Sinha Institute in Patna for 1 year. During emergency, he launched the Save JP campaign in London. In 81, for Gandhi Peace Foundation, he produced a detailed report of study of the state of bonded labor in India and traced it to the kind of mechanisms that were evolved during the British rule in the 19th century. 82 onwards, he relocated to India. He was largely in Sevagram, but as I told you, between 1984 to 94, he spent a considerable amount of time in Chennai also. One main thing was during this period, he visited large number of institutions, colleges, civil society institutions, public institutions, institutions of higher learning, universities, IITs, and gave talks, discussed largely with youngsters and the faculty the state of our knowledge of India and how that affects the way we are able to understand and operate today. Beautiful Tree was published in 83. 87, he became a fellow of ICHR, and he was again reappointed in 91 and 99. So his Pune lectures in 86, then Bengaluru lectures in 87, and he gave a set of lectures in Bikaner. They all are of a similar type, about India's past, the British intervention, and what has happened in the current post-independence era. His analysis and viewpoint, they are contained in those 3 set of lectures. Then this Bharatiya Chittamana Skala was published in 1993, after which he did publish a few more studies, and a collection of his articles was also published. He was chairman of National Cattle Commission in 2001 and 2. He passed away in Sevagram in 2006. So this was his first book, 1962, Panchayat Raj as the Basis of Indian Polity. This presents all the discussion that occurred in the Constituent Assembly about panchayats. This passionate debate was actually the cause for ultimately a clause being inserted in the directive principles that the state shall make provision for panchayats and give adequate resources and powers to them. Now, this book gives an understanding of how quite early in his life, Dharmapal ji had a deep interest in understanding classical Indian society and polity and the process of its subversion. The main thing about the Constitution of India was that it took the individual as the unit, and the grama was completely neglected. The village was completely neglected. And this is contrary to classical Indian political ideas and practice, which was giving a very central place to the role of grama. So it also went against the grain of our independence struggle, because Gram Swaraj was one of the most commonly thought of and talked about ideals that Mahatma Gandhi ji said repeatedly for about 30 years. Many of the founders of our constitution were unhappy, and perhaps this they thought was a betrayal of Gandhian ideals. So they gave passionate expression to their disappointment during the course of the proceedings of the Constituent Assembly. The 5 volumes are all printed. So in 1962, what Dharmapal ji did was, he compiled wherever this point is discussed in the Constituent Assembly proceedings to bring back this debate to the current in 1962. So the main complaint was that those who drafted the Constitution had searched through the constitutions of the whole world, but they had no time to study classical Indian polity. Of course, they closed this debate in Constituent Assembly by saying, now we have made a directive principle, let us stop this, because already too much time has been spent, and in 1949 November, they closed the discussion and the Constitution came into force on January 26, 1950. But the debate has not ended in Indian public mind. The nation will have to debate this and find ways of reformulating our polity such that all our localities are empowered to run their own affairs. The power of the grama, we should come back to this understanding, is the power of the nation. So I'll just give 2-3 extracts. This was in November 1948 when the draft constitution was first debated in the Constituent Assembly. And at that time, already this issue was debated in the press because certain followers of Mahatma Gandhi had written to Rajendra Prasad, the President of Constituent Assembly, saying that the draft constitution which is being circulated does not have any mention of village Swaraj, panchayat system, etc. So Ambedkar, the chairman of the drafting committee, we should all remember that the drafting committee was actually a draft scrutinizing committee for which Dr. Ambedkar was the chairman. The first draft was prepared by Bengaluru Narasimharaja, a Kannadiga but based in Chennai originally, a civil servant under the British rule. Bengaluru Narasimharaja was the person who brought out a first version of the constitution sometime around June, July 1947. And that was presented to the draft scrutinizing committee chaired by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar to formulate the draft constitution to be debated by the assembly. So basically Ambedkar ji is saying that what is village but a sink of localism and all that, it's appropriate that the constitution has not given it a statutory status. And so this is some of the reactions from various, not in. He's quoting Metcalfe to say that the villagers were totally careless about whatever happened outside of them. And they might be self-sufficient, or they may be interested, they may be autonomous, but they did not think of the nation. Things like, whatever he had understood of classical Indian history based upon his own experiences, he was reflecting it. But that was not the mood of the independence struggle as such. I'm sorry, I am going back. So this is the kind of some of the people who responded. This was again in November 48. Loknath Mishra, then Dakshayani Velayudhan. Basically, they were unhappy with the statement of Ambedkar. Second, they said that we have not made an indigenous political version of our constitution. It has been completely alien to us. This is a very interesting statement. This actually came when the constitution was finally passed in November 1949. So the whole constitution was there. And here is Hanumantaya ji who is lamenting that we were wanting to hear the music of veena and sitar, but here we have the music of an English band. And he says, of course, this we cannot blame anybody. The people who were given this responsibility, most of them were not in sympathy with the freedom movement. They did not understand the mass idea under which the independence struggle was launched. But they were professionals. They all knew the legal codes. They were very well versed in case law and code law. So, but he says we have to be blamed because we have handed over this job to them, etc. So this is the kind of sentiment that was there in 1949, a large number of people, and soon enough some panchayats were established, panchayat acts were made, etc., and that's a long history. Now I go back to Dharmapal ji, that from this he then soon moved on to archival research. That was based upon various experiences that he had under the Madras Panchayat system and various studies. So wherever he went, he found that the villagers had alternative mechanisms by which they used to take decisions, rather than using what is called the statutory panchayat that was elected under the new Panchayat Raj regulations that came into force in different states after independence. So in Rajasthan, they said they had rebuilt a tank, but there was no record in the Panchayat minutes of. So Dharmapalji asked, where did you take this decision? They said, we took this decision in something called Bis Biswa Panchayat of our own. And so he asked, in future, if you have to do take similar decisions, where will you go? No, that will be taken there. So what is this panchayat about? They said, this is government panchayat. What is its job? Development. So, and so this is one kind. But the other kind was that there is total loss of memory about the way various regulations are passed. So in Madras, they found that the panchayat meetings couldn't be held anywhere because there were various groups. So the meeting could not be held in the house of one member, other group will not go. So then every village had a school even then in Tamil Nadu. So it was thought it can be held in a school, but the school will be disturbed in weekdays. So why not Sundays? So the villagers said, as per the statutes, the meeting cannot take place on a Sunday. And a couple of years later, as Dharmapalji says, a year or two later, I was to learn that this rule of not transacting any public business on a Sunday dated to around 1800. And that this rule was enacted here in India within a few years of the enactment of a similar act in Great Britain pertaining to a stricter observance of the Sabbath day. It is around 1800, which prohibited, in England, most public activity in Britain on a Sunday. Incidentally, such enactments in many matters continue when Dharmapalji is talking about this in the 80s. In matters like staging of plays, opening of most shops, prohibition of private washing clothes and putting them in back garden. So these were all prohibitions of any public activity on the day of Sabbath. And he also pointed out that in Israel, the Sabbath is celebrated even with same strictness in Saturday. So that what the small village in Tamil Nadu was suffering was due to a certain statute and certain thing that pertained to what happened somewhere else. And it was even more tragic that we Indians had continued with this without, we took the old statute and copied it to a current statute. So this is the kind of thing that led him on to archival research. So the second most important, the first important book on archive, based on archival research of Dharmapalji was Science and Technology. I'll come to it in a minute. So he published a book on civil disobedience in Indian tradition. Mahatma Gandhi in his Hind Swaraj did say that this satyagraha is an old form that was practiced in India. But most people thought that this was an innovation of Gandhiji himself. So Dharmapalji found out, while looking through various records, that there was a very major movement which happened in Varanasi in 1810 and 11. And this was against the imposition of a house tax by the British. And Varanasi, one of the most populated towns at that time in 1810. And most of those houses were mutts or temples or scholarly institutions. And this, the people thought that this could never have been the case. A place to stay was as natural to Indians like having water or having air. And these could not be matters of governmental intervention and taxation. So they found it as something that was repugnant to their understanding of what was dharma and adharma. And so lakhs of people gathered in the banks of Ganga, around from, I think, the Shashwamedh Ghat up to Secrol or somewhere. And people stopped cremating bodies and they just sat on dharna for about, this went on for a couple of months almost. And all communities participated in it. And great effort was made to suppress this, but this was going on. Finally, certain agreement was reached. But anyway, the main point, Dharmapalji, he has given the detailed records of all this correspondence and all the, as it is found in the British records, what the magistrate wrote, what the Governor General wrote, etc. And what were the petitions they submitted. So main point is that Dharmapalji says if you move the clock by 110 years, what happened during 1920, 1919, 1920, 21 is reminiscent of what happened in Banaras. So this is very important for us even today because the governance is based on the consent of people. And traditionally in India, people did refuse to obey laws or rules that they felt was against dharma. Only thing was they did not resort to violence. They said, we are ready to take whatever punishment that the rulers might give us, because we cannot follow this, which is repugnant to what we consider to be proper. And so this was the essence of Satyagraha, but they did it not at individual level in the 20th century, but a collective level. So we have to get back to this understanding. In fact, Dharmapalji quoted these verses in Shanti Parva Mahabharata, that Samarakshitaram, Hantaram, Rajanam. So, Tam Nihantya, Sanihantya, the people should gather and finish him off. Shveneva, Shveneva, so Unmada. Meaning, sorry, I'm forgetting it, I should have put it down here. So, that kind of classical understanding of Indian polity comes up. So now we go to books of Dharmapalji, which have perhaps been discussed a little bit more in, I have myself talked about this in quite a few places. So I will go through this a little bit more quickly. The earlier two books might not have been familiar to many of you. So this book created quite some stir when it was published. In fact, the Indian National Science Academy, Professor D.S. Kothari, organized, who was the president of INSA then, organized a seminar on this in 1971, etc. So this is a book which collects various articles that Dharmapalji found, or material in private correspondence that he found by European observers, mostly British, where they seem to be saying that the technologies that we see in India seem to offer promising ways of improving the corresponding technologies in Europe. They are not merely describing as travelogues. They are saying these are something which may be of interest to us. So those kind of technical articles or reports and many other articles which appeared in European journals like Philosophical Transactions of Royal Society, etc. So there are about 8 articles on science, 6 articles on sciences, and 11 articles on technology. So on science, one of the articles was on this Man Mandir Observatory in Varanasi. And there the main point is that Robert Barker, who is describing it in 1777, he says that this was erected 200 years ago, which means at the time of Raja Man Singh. And Man Mandir was recognized as one of the 5 celebrated observatories of the world by Encyclopedia Britannica in its editions till 1823. Of course, this was later on thought of to be built by Raja Jai Singh only. And Raja Jai Singh has built 5 observatories in Varanasi, Delhi, Jaipur, Ujjain, and Mathura. The Mathura one has been destroyed in 19th century. The others are there. This is the one in Delhi. This is more well known today for various protests that take place around it, Jantar Mantar. But this is the main Samrat Yantra, and today the accuracy of this instrument is about 1 degree of the arc. And this, as we know, is the very limit of naked eye observations. So they could reach that kind of observations. Now coming back to, there were other accounts like Lee Gentil in 1770, who is the assistant of Cassini, the French royal astronomer. He came to India to observe the transit of Venus. So he is recording that the Tamilian astronomers were able to calculate eclipses to the same level of accuracy and sometimes even better than the currently available accuracy of the European table. So coming back to the observatory, immediately the articles started appearing saying this observatory was never used. It was only used for ostentatious purposes than for scientific purposes. Anyway, so there's a long history that whether it was built 200 years earlier or not, we don't know. The consensus of scholarly consensus of later times is this was built by Raja Jai Singh around 1720. Raja Jai Singh is a very important figure in Indian history, but I will not go into that. Dharmapalji in his book says that its appearance today seems even more neglected. This is his writing in 1971 than that described 2 centuries ago, except for a few plates which have been fixed. And its counterparts in Britain, France, etc., I would also add South Korea, China, etc., are greatly cherished and serve as the repositories and centers of their respective astronomical heritage. This is a current photograph from Google of the state of Varanasi Observatory on Man Mandir Ghat. So another important article there is of Colebrook on Indian algebra, where basically he's saying this method of solving quadratic indeterminate equations called Varga Prakriti, which is there in Bhaskara's Bijaganita, is as near an approach to a general solution of such problems as was made until the days of Lagrange in 1770. He says it's as good just before Lagrange or something, but current scholarly understanding of this was done by Professor Krishna Swami Iyengar of Mysore, father of A.K. Ramanujan, who showed in 1929 that the method given by Bhaskara in Bijaganita was more optimal than what Lagrange and Euler had found in 18th century. It's about more optimum by nearly 30%. There were other accounts of Indians having discovered infinite series. The first person to note it was John Warren, who was in Madras Observatory. Then Charles Wish wrote a detailed article, which was initially not published because the people in charge of Madras Literary Society said, this cannot be the case. Indeed, the pretensions of Hindus to such a knowledge of geometry is too ridiculous to deserve refutation. But ultimately it got published in the Proceedings of Royal Asiatic Society in 1834. It was taken as, accepted as a lecture in 1832. So there Wish is saying about, talking about the Malayalam astronomers who were still active then. And he also says, I will write a later paper giving the proofs of all these infinite series and all that. They were not published. But this was the kind of understanding of Indian science in early 19th century, late 18th century that was there. About technology, Dharmapalji's articles are even more important because this debate on science continues in some manner even today. But about technology, we hardly know or we hardly remember that Indians were having sophisticated technologies. So there are some articles on making of specific materials like mortar, making of ice, making of paper. Two articles on Indian agriculture. One is to show how good Indians are in general, agriculture in general, and one on the drill plow, which at that time was thought of as a new innovation. This is a photograph of drill plow that article published, which Dharmapalji is reproducing. But more importantly, there was a long report of Holwell, who was governor in Bengal in 1767. He is giving a lecture to the British College of Physicians in 1767. It came out as a booklet, where he is discussing how Indians were practicing inoculation, and it was so effective that 1 in a million fails of receiving infection. And Indians also have an understanding that the immediate cause of smallpox exists in our bodies, but what is called the acting cause, nimitta karana, which sets it up first, is a number of animalculae, what we will call as bacteria today. So they had this kind of understanding of how smallpox came. And this was done by a set of experts, physicians going from Vrindavan, Allahabad, Benares to every village and inoculating. I mean, something very similar to what happened 2-3 years ago when we developed this. Covaxin was something like the older inoculation formulation. And very great amount of effort was taken to go to every village and see that people are inoculated there. This inoculation was banned in India in 1802-3 because vaccination was discovered by Jenner and they didn't want this to continue. The other important thing, set of articles, I mean, there is some understanding of plastic surgery that became a big hit in Europe, and it's now today acknowledged that plastic surgery was taken from, the initial understanding of that was taken from India. The cement that was used to sort of join the nose was sent by one of the friends of the president of Royal Society, who was a physician here in Pune, Helena Scott. So he sends a sample of this cement, things like that. But the most interesting thing there are about 3 articles on Indian iron and steel. They practice of making iron and steel in central India and South India also. The steel process is not really described in these articles in detail, but the iron process are described in great detail. This set of articles show this was widespread in India, and the quantities produced, estimates are given, how much was produced in each furnace. And Dharmapalji estimates there could have been about 10,000 furnaces in India, north and south, and producing 20 tons of iron annually. And this Woods steel was appreciated. I'll just give you a citation of that in a minute. And basically, its energy efficiency was also understood to be very highly desirable. Now, there is quite an amount of literature on this. Even today, if you just search Google and try to see what articles are there on Indian iron and steel, I could come across some 150 technical articles. 20 were published in 19th century, 40 in 20th century, 90 in the first 2 decades of 21st century. But most of these articles originate outside India. There are, of course, some very great scholars in India, like late Professor Balasubramania in IIT Kanpur, who have done some very pioneering work on this. So this was the kind of furnace and various implements that is shown in Dharmapalji's book. And this is Stoddart, who collaborated with Faraday, who says that the Indian steel is of the best quality. And I would like to use it whenever I get a sample. And there's something interesting that the British did. The first report of Indian iron and steel was in Philosophical Transaction in 1795. It's an article on experiments that George Pearson conducted on the sample of Woods steel sent from India. Now, Helena Scott, when he sent this sample, he writes saying, this admits of a harder temper than anything that we are acquainted with. Now, the same statement is quoted in the Philosophical Transactions, but with a change. Harder temper than anything known in that part of India. So this is the extent to which by 1795 the Britishers had worked out how much credit is to be given and where it is to be given and in what manner it is to be given. Even while citing a letter that is sent to them, they could make alterations. So Dharmapalji says that the 17th, 18th century European view of science and politics was opposed to the way in which non-European societies talked about them. So they had different seekings, different development directions. Second is, in India, the organization was more in tune with the decentralist practices. So these iron furnaces could be taken from one place and set up about 20 miles away later and then 50 miles away later. So those were the kind of things. But this smallness doesn't mean, or decentralized doesn't mean crude. It means certain higher level of sophistication, actually, that it could be made to work everywhere. But more than that, Dharmapalji says, at the time of European onslaught, indigenous tendencies in India seem to have been in a state of slow resurgence. This is a very important thing. He has not written much about this, so I have highlighted this. That this 18th century was thought of to be a dark age, even in current historical accounts. But Dharmapalji's understanding is this is a time of the politics, science, technology, everything was reviving after about 400-500 years of alien rule, when we had a certain breather between 1707 and 1760-70. And then he's talking about the post-independence India. Main complaint is that we have been transplanting what has been developed in the European world. And such transplanting has happened only at the level, not only at the level of theories, but even more so as regards organization of the technology in the direction of research. So it's largely due to that complete transplanting and its unthinking acceptance that though many individual Indian scientists and technologists are as creative, and we can say more creative and innovative as their colleagues in European world, the impact of science and technology on the larger society of India is in fact minimal. Perhaps this is an overstatement as regards today, but the idea that we continue to do transplanting and even transplanting the whole thing, organization, including the directions of research, etc., quite a bit of it can apply to, because we have not thoughtfully, there is much more science and technology going on in India, therefore we cannot say that its impact on larger society is minimal, but the rest of the thing is. And now he is trying to just argue that issue is not about borrowing of ideas, because during the centuries, we must have borrowed several ideas, several techniques from all over the world. But it's only the unthinking transplanting which has resulted in retarding and blunting indigenous innovation and creativity. Now, how to restore this indigenous innovation and creativity? First is to recollect that these are not alien to us. These technologies are not aliens. These sciences are not completely foreign to us. We don't need to start from scratch or a blank slate. And second, really to get to know what we did and how we did. If we are acquainted with that, we will get many more ideas even for today. Because we were blessed with a science and technology which was flourishing perhaps continuously for 2 millennia, and it had its own seekings and ideas. And it used the Indian materials, Indian resources, but it also used Indian philosophical ideas and Indian ethical and moral principles to govern science and technology. So he says for innovation, for the innovative and creative applications of science and technology, we have to quickly rediscover our tradition of science and technology. Not that we need to reduplicate it, but we need to act as if we are continuing that tradition in the modern day with many more innovative import from various traditions. So anyway, we need to, after Dharmapalji, I don't think much work has been done on the archival work on science and technology, meaning materials that may be available. So we need to collect all the sort of, there are also source texts and manuscripts, which Dharmapalji is not talking about. There is also articles and publications made outside India. But there are also a lot of archival material in terms of reports, governmental reports and letters. And not merely in Europe and America, but could be in many other parts of the world on India. So we have to make our higher education institutions take a look at this. And wherever there is something of interest in science that they find, they need to examine it more carefully and in depth to be able to get some interesting things out of it. Beautiful Tree is the next important book written by Dharmapalji. This created quite an amount of debate. Maybe many people are acquainted with its. So Beautiful Tree title comes from a speech Mahatma Gandhi made in the Royal, that Chatham House, that Institute of International Affairs or something like that, when he had gone to England for the second roundtable conference. So he says India today, that's in 1931, is more illiterate than it was 50 or 100 years ago, and so is Burma. At that time, Burma was also a part of the British India. And he says it's because the British sort of dug the beautiful tree and kept the roots exposed in the beautiful tree. So when we get independence, our state will revive the old village schoolmaster and not every village, because the current system is too expensive for us, etc. There's a much detailed, this is a very interesting speech. People can go and see, it's available in the collected works. There were various reports of, British didn't do much about education except for setting up a Sanskrit college and an Arabic college in Calcutta in late 18th century. So there were various reports, Thomas Munro saying there's a village school, a school in every village for teaching reading, writing, arithmetic. Then the public dispatch says that out of public resources, every village employs teachers. There is this, and they even say greater proportion of persons in India who can read. This is a report in 1819. And very interestingly, this Pendergast is saying young natives are taught upon a system so economical that there is hardly a cultivator or petty dealer who is not competent to keep his own accounts with a degree of accuracy, in my opinion, beyond what we meet with amongst the lower order. Meaning the ordinary people in this country, out of this elementary or basic education of 5 or 8 years, acquire competence in reading, writing, in arithmetic, commercial mathematics, writing letters, petitions, which is much beyond what we see in our society in 1821. And to a large extent, this is a thing that the government of India is recognizing even today. The new education policy says that our education system, even a boy of class 8 is unable to do a simple mathematics problem, arithmetic problem of class 2, or read a passage that he has to read in class 4. So what we were able to achieve 200 years ago is indeed very interesting. So the Beautiful Tree largely gives the detailed reports of collectors of 20 districts in a survey that was conducted during 1822 to 25 in the 20 districts of Madras Presidency. It also includes some interesting extracts from parallel reports, one by Adam in 1835 to 1838, and a brief extract from Leitner's report in Punjab. Punjab comes under British rule around 1850 only. Now, this Madras survey, summarizing its result, the Governor Thomas Munro says that there are so many schools and so many colleges, which means institutions of higher learning. And his estimate is of the boys of the age group of 5 to 10. He estimates the total population and says how many boys are there in the age group 5 to 10. About 1/4 are being educated in these schools. These are public schools, and education is going on, and 1/4 of the boys of school-going age are being educated. The number of girls is small. But he says, but I have a feeling that it's something like 1/3, 33%, not 1/4. Why is that so? Because there is something else happening. Apart from public schools, there is also a system in which people were educating their children at home. It doesn't mean that they were themselves teaching. They were getting an instructor to come and teach at home. And for the Madras district, this is not Madras presidency. The previous one was for Madras presidency, all the 20 districts. In Madras district, the collector made a survey of this. In how many households this teaching is going on at home. And the number of households in which teaching was going on at home was 4.5 times the number of households in which the people were going to the schools. And this for all communities. I'll come to the communities issue soon. So another important thing, so the schools were widespread. Second most important thing is they were very inclusive in the sense that what the survey format asked the collectors to say how many Brahmana students are there, Kshatriya students are there, Vaishya students are there, Shudra students are there, students of other castes, which we may broadly take today's scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, Muslims. So under all these categories, they were to fill in. And what we find is that the majority of the students come from the Shudra community, 50%, other castes 15%, Brahmanas 20%, and Vaishyas 9% in the whole presidency. And there's much more this non-Dvijas are found in the Tamil areas. Tamil areas, the Shudras are 62 and the other castes are 40. So this was another thing which has perhaps completely gone out of our public memory, because what we are aware of is what happened after the British education system, what happened in 1880s, 1890s. Maybe I will show you what happened after 1880s. These schools were completely, they continued even after the introduction of the British education system. They continued till 1870, after which they were taken over by they became departmental schools. But till then, departmental schools had only 5% of the boys. The 95% of the boys were going into these indigenous schools. And there were almost none in the departmental schools from what is called the other castes. The caste composition is given in the annual reports of this. And even in 1931, the dropout rate in class 4 in the departmental schools was 80%. This is what resulted in low literacy levels. When British left India in 1951 in Madras presidency, the literacy was only 28%. But the literacy of scheduled castes was less than 5%, and literacy of scheduled tribes was less than 0.5%. So anyway, and equally interesting is the issues concerning the language of instruction in the schools were regional languages. The subjects taught were arithmetic, commercial mathematics, literature, etc. Okay. So this Campbell, who is the collector of Bellary, explains in detail the method of pedagogy. I will not talk about this. Only thing he is emphasizing is that in order that fractions together with the arithmetic table in addition, multiplication, and those on the threefold measures of capacity, weight, and extent may be rendered quite familiar, the students are made to stand up twice a day and repeat the whole. All this was etched in. So similarly, the poems were made to read, and they were all made to write every letter 100 times, 1,000 times, etc. So this exercising to ensure that this elementary reading, writing, and arithmetic was the goal of the school system. And other things came, and he says 3 books that all of them knew were Ramayana, Mahabharata, and Bhagavata. We do not even find a mention of them even in the new education policy. So, and so like this is what the pedagogy of indigenous education was. So we need to pay attention not only to the fact that the education was widespread, was inclusive, but we had some special pedagogy that was appreciated, that was even adopted in what was called the Bell-Lancaster system in England, and various things. So that needs to be looked into. So there were higher education data also shows in Kerala predominance of astronomy and medicine, and all communities are studying that. I told you about the Kerala mathematics and astronomy proficiency. The Bengal survey was confined to only 5 districts by Adam. Bengal is a very huge area, Bengal presidency. But there you can see grammar, logic, and law were the important subjects studied in higher education. There is a very interesting account of the University of Navadvipa. We have all heard of Nalanda, Takshashila, Odantapuri, Vikramashila, and all that, even some very important place in Bangladesh. But this Navadvipa, in 1787, in 1791, there were 1,100 students and 150 masters. And this article says that in 1680, this was at the time when Gadadhar Bhattacharya, Jagadish Tarkalankara were all the doyens there. There were in Nadia no less than 4,000 students and masters in proportion. In 1829, there were 500 students. So we know how the opinions were expressed by Macaulay, saying that we have the capacity to decide whether we give instruction in these outmoded subjects and outdated ideas, or give them the light that we have received to them. And he also said that the natives are desirous to be taught English and are not desirous to be taught Sanskrit and Arabic. And his source of information is this. This is not to belittle this great man, Raja Ram Mohan Rai, who did great amount of service to the Bengal society. But this shows the level that our society had reached by 1820s of 70 years of British rule. As we all know, within about 10 years of British rule, there was a famine in 1771, which destroyed about 1/3 of the population. And things like that. This is what conquest does, as I said at the beginning of this talk. So here is Rajaram Mohan Rai declaring that we would like our children to be taught all these subjects in English, because Sanskrit language is so difficult that almost a lifetime is necessary for its perfect acquisition. It's well known to have been for ages a lamentable check on diffusion of knowledge. Similarly, he says Sanskrit system of education would be the best calculated to keep this country in darkness. Of course, when British said in darkness, it means bereft of Christian knowledge, but he perhaps was not meaning that. So now I go to the next kind of work of Dharmapalji on Indian society and polity. I'll speak for about 15 more minutes. Okay. Okay. So he gave this series of lectures in Pune, where he has tried to summarize his understanding, his data. And as Shashi Kiranji pointed out, much of this material that he collected is not fully analyzed or published. So he gave these lectures, and in fact in these lectures he has not even given the references. So much of it is to be found in these archival papers that have been sort of catalogued. But it's available for view in our Center for Policy Studies website. But one has to know, I mean, it's been well catalogued and all that, but these are bits and pieces of extracts from records, and we will have to get another Dharmapal to explain to us the significance of each and every one of those papers. So meaning more work is needed to sort of get the material out of them, but they are very valuable papers. So Dharmapalji is saying in 1987 that there is some very detailed record pertaining to 2,000 villages of Chengalpet. And this idea shows, the most important part of this survey is that there were detailed deductions from the total agricultural produce in every village, which was used for the maintenance of institutions and infrastructure of the village, and for intra-village institutions and offices. And this and similar data does imply that every person in this society enjoyed a certain dignity, and that his social and economic needs were very well provided for. This is a summary of so there is more things. He says that the polity which such data suggests is the kind of polity that Mahatma Gandhi spelled out in his idea of oceanic circles. I will comment on that towards a few minutes later. So a summary of this data has been available. This is available on our website also, a booklet also is available. So basically it goes into various issues. These 2000 village records are both in English, but the original records in Tamil were also preserved, what the British collected from every village accountant. And that shows the high level of mathematics and competence that the village accountants had, that they were describing every bit of that village numerically, adding them up, etc. So one is they have given very detailed land data, each village. And a summary of this for 1910 localities shows that about 13% of the land was covered by water. And about 17% was covered by woods and plantations. The habitation was only about 3%. And cultivable land was only about half of the total land. So these were the kind of... So this is a map, Survey of India map, about 50 years old. This is Kanchipuram. This is Chengalpet. This Chengalpet. This is a very famous ancient place called Uttar Merur, which has that beautiful inscriptions on democracy in the democratic functioning of villages in 8th century. Nagaswami. This is Madurantakam. So the interesting thing is all these blue things are all the areas or the keres that we call in Tamil Nadu and in Karnataka. And just a few minutes ago I was talking to Ganesh ji, and that this is a report from Sankey quoted by Haivaran Rao in Gazetteer. The original report is I think 1866. The main thing is the old Mysore princely state had 29,500 square miles. It had more than 38,000 tanks. And the idea of these tanks was that they were connected with each other, that the overflow from one tank will flow to another, and the overflow in the next goes to the third, or goes to some river, or goes to some channel. So they were all dug and created appropriately, looking at the ups and downs or the terrain of the terrain. And what Sankey found was interesting, that this principle of storage is so scientifically done that any absolutely new work of this description would, within this area, be almost certainly found to cut off the supply of another lower down the same basin and to interfere. Which means you cannot add one, subtract one, that the terrain has been so well observed. And so if anything we had to learn about our geography, we had to just look at all these tanks and make a good map of them. Today we can make good GIS systems or whatever. Of course, maybe 1/3 of them are under really difficult situation. But perhaps even 2/3 of them are recoverable and usable and wherever villagers are able to do it in their local areas, etc. And wherever governments are doing something, they are doing something about them. Then is the population. So every household is mentioned and its occupation. Actually, its jati is mentioned, but roughly the jatis are mentioned via the occupations. We find about half of them, more than half of them are peasants and cow keepers. Interesting thing is about 13% are craftsmen, artisans are doing some kind of manufacturing or the other. 7% merchants. Essential services meaning barber and washermen, 3%. And cultural, ritual functionaries around 13.9%. About 10% Brahmins are there in this area at that time. Registry and accounting is 3%, Kanakapilas. Very interesting, militia and police is 3.5%, which is, today we do not have more than 1.5% of militia and police. So every village was endowed with that kind of. And very detailed agricultural data is there. We just need to look at this figure, that the productivity was about 2.2 metric tons per hectare. This is for about 1,500 localities for about 1,12,000 hectares. That's producing about 2.5 million metric ton, 2.2 million tons per hectare. So this is per household. There were 60,000 etc. households in the entire area, but in this area there are about, for which the production data is available, is about 48,000 households. What we find, production per household is 5 tons. Production per hectare is 2.22. Even today, I think we have not crossed 2 tons per hectare in food grains productivity all over India, all India average. And availability of food grains per family today is about 1 ton. It's 200 kilograms per person, or now it has, in the last 3 years, it has risen to 230 or 235 kilograms per person. So maybe it's about 1.2 to 1.3 tons. But this figure, 5 tons, is something that's currently found in United States or things like that. So most crucially, the localities had a budget, and they had two mechanisms. One was a set of agricultural lands were assigned as manyams. Manyam means, or inam or whatever, that meant traditionally that the revenue of that land is assigned to the beneficiary. The land itself is cultivated by the cultivator who is cultivating the land, but the revenue that is due to any authority, village or higher, is assigned to the beneficiary. 1/4 of the lands were assigned as manyams, but more than that, 1/3 of the produce. So there is a detailed accounting in each village called Sutantiram and Merai. They say so much percentage of land has to be taken at the time of threshing, so much proportion of the produce is to be taken at the time of measuring, and then so much proportion of the produce is to be taken. And in each village there was about a long list. On the average, about 30 beneficiaries were mentioned in each village. And if you go to the entire region, more than 100 kind of beneficiaries are mentioned. And so both Manyam and this Sotantram and Merais are summarized here for about 1800 villages. The Manyams are mainly given to certain higher functionaries, but there are Manyams for everybody, for cowkeepers, for barbers, washermen, potter, etc. So this is a way of sharing the sovereignty, so to say, with all the people. The share of the crops is very important. This goes to the agricultural laborers. This goes to irrigation fund. This goes to larger temples in the area. This portion is about, out of this 27, this is about 17 or 16%. This is about 10 to 11%, which goes to higher areas. So the village was allocating not only for the village people, but for institutions outside of the village, some of them administrative, some of them accounting, some of them militia and police, and some of them, and most of them for religious and other authorities. And so just for instance, the great cultural centers that got a share of produce. So this Kanchipuram Vararaja Swami from 1300 villages, 1250, this Srivarambhudur, you would know Kumbakonam Chikodiar means Kanchi, Shankaracharya Matam, which had relocated to Kumbakonam because the Arcot kings had come to that region in Kanchipuram. Tirupur, this Chennai, Mailapur Kapalishwarar, then this Tiruvalikeni, this Patsarthi temple, this Kapalishwar temple. So like that. But the idea was that this area was notionally ruled by the Arcot Nawab in 1762 to 67. So all that he could interfere in the system in the pre-British time was that he added some Muslim beneficiaries to the same system. The same system continued with a new set of beneficiaries because the Arcot Nawab was quite weak. There was no larger Mughal rule in Delhi, or the Nizam was not powerful either. So he had to accede to whatever was the local system. The British, of course, got it dismantled very soon. Anyway, so the crucial thing of this table is that the larger area was a part of, as much a part of the village's concern as the village itself. And this kind of list we can look for even today from the district gazetteers as to see which are the major sort of temples which were beneficiaries in 1820s. Some information we can gain. So this is not something specific to Chengalpet or things like that. So basically this was a political system where it was not pyramid-like, but what Mahatma Gandhi wants to say, this like oceanic circles. The outer circle supports the next circle, supports the next circle, supports the next circle, and they strengthen each other. And this he wrote at the time when the constitution was being thought of in July 1946 under the title Independence. So this is what he says everywhere, but in this article he tries to specify it a little bit more, that every village shall be a republic or a panchayat having full powers. This you would have heard in any article of Mahatma Gandhi. So Dharmapal ji has also some data on agricultural wages and productivity in northern India in this book, that An article in Edinburgh Review says that the wages of agricultural laborer in Assam or Allahabad region in real terms is higher than what a British laborer got. This in 1803 in Allahabad. After that had come under British rule for more than 30 years. And productivity was also high. He's also referring to the fact that in 18th century there is lot of data in Chengalpet also about the wages of agricultural laborers being higher than what is found in England. There's some other very interesting data which I wanted to say. This is a survey that Thomas Munro conducted in what are called the seeded districts. These were seeded after the first Mysore War, I think, 1792, this Bellary and Kadapa. In 1806, this is the position that the population by means of their consumption, this was surveyed, like the National Sample Survey on consumption that we do today. So the population could be categorized into 3 categories, more or less of same level. First level is 2.6 lakhs, second level is 3.7 lakhs, third level 2.12 lakhs, 18 lakhs. So the list gives a large number of categories, what are consumed. But amount of food grains consumed by all of them seem to be the same. Half a seer of grain per person per day. The quantity or quality, the quality of the grain may be different. And the schedule includes 23 other items including betel nut, ghee, oil, tamarind, coconuts, etc. Drugs, medicine, cloth, firewood, vegetables, betel leaves. And as an illustrative pattern, the number of pans consumed per year in a family of 6 is given as 9,600 for the first category, 4,800 for the second category, and 3,600 for the third category. Perhaps there was not much tobacco at those times, so this would have been very healthy practice. The consumption of ghee and oil was similarly 3:1:1, pulses 8:4:3, etc. A very detailed table is there which Dharmapal has not produced. Maybe when we produce a second edition of this, we will give these tables. The rate in which the total consumption of the first class was 17 rupees, second class was 9 rupees, and the third class was 7 rupees. So it's in the ratio of 2:1:0.8. Of course, this is the average consumption. There would be individual families consuming much less than this. Then again, he has tried to give this wages. He's tried to give some idea. After, in 1799, the highest paid officer of Tipu, the governor of Chitradurg, was getting 100 rupees. The wages of an ordinary laborer was about 4. Whenever we give this kind of data for Tipu, it should not be confused that he set up this system or something like that. There's a lot of literature on how Tipu used rockets. So that the rockets were not invented in India in 1790, 85 or something like that. So of course he used it very creatively in the war, which is very creditable, but we should understand them in context. Now the new differentials that were brought into being after this period by British was that the district collector got 1,500 rupees per month, the governor general got 8,000, 6,000 to 8,000. Wages for ordinary laborers were about 4 rupees. But Mahatma Gandhi in his independence pledge, 1931, a pledge of independence is there. So Britain has ruined India economically, culturally, spiritually, and etc. Economically, politically, culturally, and spiritually. So he is pointing out, even in that talk in Royal International Institute in Chatham House, he is saying the Prime Minister in England is getting 50 times the average wage of a individual in England, whereas India, the Viceroy gets 5,000 times the average salary of even of a government servant, and not let alone be average money earned by a laborer. So these were the kind of disparities. So in Dharmapalji's this archival documents, just to give one idea of the kind of documents, I just put this. There are many similar. This is in Baramahal. This is near Dharmapuri. This was again ceded to the British in 1792 by Tipu, this region, Salem and Dharmapuri. These are the wages given to in a temple. It's a very famous temple, Krishna Swami temple. You can see it even today. The lowest wage is about this sweeper, 1 pagoda. And the highest is for this, I think, Parupategar, about 5.8 pagodas. 1:5.5 or something like that. And what was this one pagoda? One pagoda, 720 months of rice could be bought for 5.3 pagodas. So that means about 140 months of rice per one pagoda. And a man is about 40 kilograms. So a sweeper would be getting wages equivalent to 96 quintals of rice. So that's the kind of, and what the Parvategar got was about 500 kilograms, quintals of rice. Anyway, so in concluding this book, basically, he says that the society and polity was a fairly flourishing state even in 1750s and many areas till 1800. And he says, and as we have seen earlier, the society and polity was highly organized, had an incomparable sophistication in its various arrangements, and these many things were better than the corresponding classes in Britain. In fact, popular education as such was an innovation in England in early 19th century. There were only Sunday schools and such schools, and there were few schools for the elite. But popular education for the public was begun in 19th century in Europe, in England. So I come to this Bharatiya Chittamana Skala. I'll try to finish this in 5 minutes, then we will have some questions. So this was the last book that Dharmapalji, main book that Dharmapalji wrote. So he thought that he had studied the various social, economic and cultural aspects of, technological aspects of India. And he felt that somehow he had to understand or relate it to the spirit or the fundamental philosophical outlook that animates and regulates the distinctive Indian ways of functioning. So these were merely the physical manifestations of an essential Indian consciousness, which is the civilizational consciousness of India. And a comprehension of this was important. And with this, he sort of got to read. He had read some of these earlier, but whatever translations he could get of Vedas, Upanishads, Itihasas, and Puranas, basically, he tried to read them over a period of 3.5 years in Chennai. And then he sort of talked about this in extensively, and then that was converted into a book. My colleague Jitendra Bajaj translated it into English. So this he wanted to give not a scholarly statement of India, but a statement which gives the essential contours of Indian consciousness for the general public. And that was the purpose. And he said that this is a preliminary statement. Of course, this needs to be improved. But what is important is we should quickly form such preliminary understanding of what is the essential understanding of India, which will manifest in its education or in its technology or in its political arrangements. So that was the purpose. So I'm giving a few quotations from this instead of paraphrasing it. So first he says that though Gandhiji had awakened the people of India, but this was exhausted after independence, or perhaps those who came to power in independent India had no use for the spirit and determination of an awakened people, and they found such an awakening to be great nuisance. As a result, people began to revert to their earlier state of stupor, and the leaders of India, now put in control of the state machinery created by the British. The British had a very nice term for it. They called it transfer of power. Began to indulge in a slave-like imitation of the British. Okay. The self-awakening of India is bound to remain similarly elusive and transient till we find a secure basis for confident expression of Indian civilization within the modern world and the modern epoch. We must establish a conceptual framework that makes the Indian ways and aspirations seem viable in the present, so that we do feel compelled or tempted to indulge, so that we do not feel compelled to indulge in demeaning imitations of the modern world, and that the people of India do not have to suffer the humiliation of seeing their ways and seekings being despised or denigrated in our own country. And the secure basis for Indian civilization, this framework is necessary. And this we have to get it within the Indian idea of Manas, Kala and Chitta. Now, he says, so far whatever we have studied about India in our public institutions, we have not arrived at even a preliminary picture of this. It's not that no work is being done on India or Indian literature. We have a large number of institutes founded with specific mandate of studying the various texts of Indian literature. Many high scholars have spent long years, in fact their whole life, many of them, investigating various parts of the Indian corpus. But these institutions and scholars, it seems, have been looking at Indian literature from the perspective of modernity. That they want to make India understandable to modernity. Not necessarily that they are embedded in modernity and talking about India, but we want to make it understandable to modernity. So this is essentially what Indology has been, where earlier it was done by Europeans to make India understandable to their colleagues in Europe. Indology, by very definition, is the science of comprehending India from an on-Indian perspective, and practically all Indian scholars and institutions engaged in this study fall within this discipline of Indology. They have thus been trying to make India comprehensible to the world. But what we need to learn from Indian literature is to how make modernity comprehensible to us, or in terms of our Chitta and Kala. This is the crucial point Dharmapal is trying to make. We need to form a picture of Indian Chitta and Kala, not merely to describe it, but to place modernity in terms of this. How does it look in terms of this? So how does it differ? How does it look? So not that we need to denigrate or appreciate, but we need to know what modernity is from an Indian perspective. And modern times also should be understood from this picture. Instead, our scholars have so far only been trying to place India and Indian mind and Indian consciousness within the world picture. I mean, he has said a lot more about this. This chapter is worth reading for all those scholars who are studying India, Indian texts, etc. It may sound very critical, but it is something very sort of succinctly sort of incisive that he has found in while reading all these studies. Now he is trying to give one example of, he tries to explain the Puranic understanding of creation and its evolution from Krita Yuga to Treta Yuga to Dwapara Yuga, which is discussed in Mahabharata, which is discussed in every Purana. So, and what he's found by studying this, the peculiar Indian awareness of this insignificance of man and his efforts in the unending flow of Kala, that we always thought in very huge numbers and very large distances, of which the human sort of species and the earth is a very small thing. And this is not in consonance with modernity. Of course, today we know there are galaxies which are millions of light years away. That's not the point. Believe that in every new cycle, the universe, from the moment of its creation, starts declining towards a lower and lower state, and also is also incompatible with modern consciousness. That Krita Yuga was a state of perfectness, then Treta Yuga, the Dharma is lower by one end. We come to Kali Yuga, where Dharma is standing only on one leg. So this is also contrary. And to look upon various arts and crafts and science and technologies merely as temporary human artifacts required to sustain life in a constantly decaying state of universe goes completely counter to the modern view of sciences and technologies and of human capabilities. That sciences arose in Puranas, they said, to see this difficult situation. Earlier food was plentifully available and it was called madhu, etc. Then you had to do agriculture. Like that it goes. So it's not saying that science and technology arose for man to conquer the world or understand the world, but they arose to make human life proper, possible in a changing situation. So all these basic sort of things that are etched in our consciousness, in some sense is not what modernity is known for. According to the worldview of modernity, man through his efforts, his sciences and technologies, his arts and crafts, and his various other capacities, keeps on refining the world, lifting it higher and higher, making it better and better, and molding it more and more into the image of heaven. If the Indian understanding of the unfolding of the universe and the place of man and his efforts is so contrary to the concepts of modernity, then this contrariness has to be seriously pondered over. The structures that we wish to implant in India and the processes of development that we wish to initiate can take root here only if they seem compatible with the Indian view of the universe. And so this he has written in extenso. I have tried to summarize. He has summarized the Puranic view of creation and the way we have understood the human evolution till today. Philosophically, how we view our past and how we view our role in relation to the entire universe, in relation to the Creator and the creation. Similarly, so there has been what we have done in the last century and a half have been various efforts to westernize the Indian mind so that the Indian people on their own could start associating themselves with the late 20th century and 21st centuries of the West. One of the common idioms in India is we have to catch up with the 21st century of the West. So, I mean, he starts this discussion, he's saying, but whose 21st century is it? And what? So, if the change of Indian civilization consciousness had taken place, then the ordinary Indian today would think and behave more or less like ordinary man in other societies. And his priorities would have become similar. Indians would then have also lost the peculiarly Indian belief, which even the most ordinary of the ordinary Indians harbor in his heart, that he is a part of the ultimate Brahman, and by virtue of this relationship with Brahman, he too is completely free and sovereign in himself, and would expect that to be recognized by others. In place of this feeling of freedom and sovereignty that so exasperates those who seek to administer or reform people in India, the Indian too would have then acquired the Western man's, if we had succeeded in westernizing Indian society, if we had been able to change our civilization consciousness, then we would have, according to Dharmapalji, Western man's innate sense of total subordination to the prevailing system, a subordination of the mind that man in West has always displayed irrespective of whatever the system was in any particular Western phase. A despotic feudal oligarchy, a slave society like the ancient Greece, a society of laissez-faire, or of Marxist communism, or the currently ascendant society of market forces. Dharmapalji has written briefly on this. He has not written more on his understanding of the evolution of the consciousness in Western society. But in this, he has written something more. I have just extracted the most crucial thing. But perhaps such a simple solution to civilizational problems are well nigh impossible. So what we are trying, perhaps is not something that's viable. So if westernization of India is not possible, then we will have to revert to our civilizational moorings. We will have to come back to our own Chitta and Kala, ridding ourselves of the Western ways of thought and action. Ways of thought and action, not everything that we borrow or not borrow, that's not the issue. We shall have to start understanding ourselves and the world from our civilizational perspective. So for that, we will have to undertake an exercise that Vyasa had undertaken in Mahabharata, Sri Krishna had done in Bhagavad Gita, etc. And he has earlier said that we cannot wait for a comprehensive exercise. All of us who are concerned with this problem have to indulge in making a quick sort of summary of what Indian essential ideas are in whichever domain, and keep it as a trial to see our experience, whether that coincides with it and how well it sort of works in experience, and then we can use our scholarly community to indulge in more detailed analysis and perspective on this. So anyway, he closes it on a more optimal note. Once we seriously get down to the task, it may not turn out to be too difficult to find a new direction. To reduce our seekings and aspirations, our ways of thought and action in a forum that is appropriate and effective in today's world may not be a hard task after all. And in our own civilizational history, there must have been many times such recollection, reassertion of Chitta and Kala of India occurred. We need to undertake such exploration into ourselves once again. So more or less, I have tried to summarize some of the 4 or 5 main books and portion of his thought. And I have already taken more than an hour and 15 minutes. So we will have some brief questions. I thank all of you for your patience and thank the organizers.
Thanking you for a wonderful summary of Dharmapal. I want your brief estimation of Dharmapal's contribution, strengths and weaknesses, if any.
No, the strength was he did not have to go through the normal academic training. And the other strength was his extraordinary sensitiveness to the importance of understanding the way ordinary people in India think. And in fact, he went to England and Israel to see how villages there are organized. And he found that they were not much better organized either socially or sort of in their environment than some of our well-functioning villages, which were reasonably. So he always thought one of the way of understanding what our people want was to be able to understand them, not to lecture them, not to think that they are a blank slate and on which we will write our new things that we have discovered. And this will give us a way that together we can build this new India. So this was the enormous strength of Dharmapalji. And this, therefore, he could go to the heart of any literature. I mean, all of us have read Puranas, but we have not tried to contrast with the way modernity thinks about the evolution of that. It sees the present to be the most important phase to which we have acquired, which diminishes everything that was done in the past, whereas our thinking has not been along those lines, things like that. So he could immediately go into heart of any issue while reading. So even while reading these records, there are many people who read British reports, etc. You don't go for the letter of the writing, you have to see what is the spirit behind it, whom this letter is being addressed to, and what will be the factuality. So he had that great strength in looking at books and articles and archival material. So those were the weakness was the times in which he lived. Perhaps today's India would be much more receptive to all this, but it may not have still the wisdom to see how to achieve whatever we are seeking today. But this seeking that in the independence speech of our Prime Minister, in fact, he said, this Panchapran, one of them was to completely get rid of the colonial hangover in every. Another one was to completely celebrate our civilizational heritage. So what Dharmapalji is doing are both the things only. The third thing that we have to understand, which he did understand but did not write about in great detail, his archival material is full of this kind of information. These lectures of Bharata Jagriti, etc., have some indication of that, was the way British transformed India. Unless we understand how they transformed our systems and how they changed them, we will still be wondering maybe they are remnants of what was there earlier. So this, I think, that he could not write much on that or on the West. So that we are not fortunate to get his wisdom, but we are now awakened by his work, and we could all do much more on all these things. And since the spirit of today, perhaps in India, is awakened much more and is looking for a civilizational approach to modern Indian modernity, I am sure the work of this, if we could popularize, if the 5 books that published by Rashtrotan are widely read, they are technical, so learned people have to read them and summarize them and things like that. I am sure much more things will occur.
What is the overall view of Satyapal on Indian ambition, whether he is telling that we are following the British administration, or we should not follow the British administration what it was? What is his main view on it?
It is not a question of whether we should follow what the British set up here. We should understand when it was set up, why it was set up, how it was set up, what was the initial reaction, and how it affected the Indian society. If we know these dimensions, so in education, they set up a new educational system which created an educational backwardness amongst a large section of Indian people, which created an Indian elite speaking Indian English language. Even today, that reaches only 4-5% of people of India. So if we know how this did come about and for what purposes, throughout the British administration, the ratio of the people who were literate in English to the people who were literate in Indian languages was 10:1. Maybe in independent India, it might have become 10:2. But that's the way these things are. And many such things. Much of the government under the British was concerned about government servants and not about the common citizen. The common citizen was not thought of as a citizen. He was a subject. So, and they were used to having a very large slave population in ancient times or even in 19th century. So these were not difficult things for them to administer, where most people are not thought of as citizens or even human beings. So these are all the things we have to understand. Whether you keep a ballot box of a particular kind, or whether you have a voter list, or whether you have parties, these are decisions we can much more easily take. But if we understand the purpose for which democracy has to function, then we will know what system suits us in the current situation. And
Sir, I have a small question. In the archives preserved at your institute, what are the major topics dealt with? At least the basic categories.
There's a catalog there, and it lists all the subjects. Huh? Yes, it's in cpsindia.org, www. Completely available. All those documents.
Everything is scanned.
Scanned and available. Unfortunately, we have not put his books and articles there. At some time we will do that. So that has a catalog, and that is organized as per British, that pre-British India, districts of India, British conquest, British reorganization of India, post-independence India, and something about other countries, Russia, China, etc. So it's classified into various topics, and what is the nature of the document, title of the document is there. If possible, we will make a 1 paragraph, 2 paragraph summary on each of those documents so that it's easier for a general reader. Unfortunately, we have not been able to do this. We have repeatedly, we have sometimes talked about it, and maybe in the next 1 year, we may be able to put that couple of paragraphs on each of them. That will make it easier. Okay.
Thank you, Professor Srinivas, for that most engrossing and enlightening session on Sri Dharmapal and his contributions. Professor Srinivas made it interesting the whole time. He not only took us through a journey of Sri Dharmapal's work as an archivist and as a person with a deep passion and reverence for Indian culture. And that came through, I must say, in the speech of Dr. Srinivas as well. He is an academic in the truest sense of the word, so this passion shone through. But at the same time, there was reverence for the culture in terms of pointers as how we can take forward the work done by Dharmapal and so on. I think to us at the Gokhale Institute of Public Affairs, this has been a very enlightening session because most of the objectives of Dharmapalji's work also align with the objectives of our institute as well. So once again, on behalf of the institute and all of our participants, we extend a very heartfelt thank you.